They say fire destroys everything it touches, but for me, it didn't just destroy it, uncovered truths I wasn't ready to face. My name is Elena, and this is the story of how one devastating night changed my life forever. It was a cold, quiet evening in our little neighborhood. My kids, Mia and Daniel, were fast asleep in their tiny shared bedroom. The house wasn't much, but it was ours, a small, worn-down home that held years of memories. As a single mother, I'd fought hard to keep it, juggling late shifts at the diner and endless bills. I always told myself that as long as we had a roof over our heads, we'd be okay. But that night, everything changed. I woke up to the smell of smoke, a smell that instantly gripped my chest with fear. My heart raced as I scrambled out of bed, yelling for Mia and Daniel. The hallway was already thick with smoke, and the heat was unbearable. I grabbed my children and rushed them outside, my mind spinning with panic and disbelief. Our home, the place I'd poured my heart into, was engulfed in flames. The neighbors came running, their faces filled with shock and pity. As I stood there, clutching my terrified children, I felt completely powerless. Tears streamed down my face, not just from the smoke, but from the overwhelming sense of loss. And then I heard the whispers. "Do you think she did it for the insurance?" someone muttered. Another voice added, "I heard her brother's been having money problems." Their words stung, cutting through the chaos like a knife. I didn't understand why anyone would think I'd burn down my own home. But what hurt the most was the realization that this fire wasn't just going to destroy my house. It was about to expose secrets I thought were buried forever. The morning after the fire felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The air was still thick with the acrid smell of smoke, and all that was left of our home was a charred skeleton. I stood there with Mia and Daniel by my side, trying to process how everything we owned had been reduced to ashes. The neighbors came by, offering kind words and small gestures, clothes, food, blankets, but I could still feel the weight of their judgment. Every smile felt forced, every glance a little too long. I overheard snippets of conversations as they passed by. "Do you think she get the insurance money?" one of them whispered. Another replied, "Her brother Jake's been in trouble with debt collectors. Maybe this was a way out." Jake. The mention of his name sent a wave of frustration through me. My younger brother had always been the black sheep of the family, charming but unreliable. After our parents died, I tried to keep him close, but he'd pushed me away, sinking deeper into a lifestyle I couldn't support. We barely spoke now, and yet somehow his name was being dragged into this mess. As I sifted through the wreckage later that day, hoping to salvage anything, I stumbled across something strange. Beneath a pile of soot-covered floorboards, I found a half-burnt envelope. My heart skipped a beat as I carefully opened it. Inside was a letter, yellowed with age and partially destroyed by the fire. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was from my late husband, Tom. Tom had been gone for nearly 5 years. He'd passed away suddenly, leaving me to raise our kids alone. But the contents of the letter shook me to my core. It hinted at a secret he'd kept hidden, a stash of money, just in case something ever happens. But it didn't say where it was or how much there might be. I felt a surge of anger and confusion. Why hadn't Tom told me about this? Why had he left me to struggle all these years when there was money somewhere that could have helped us? And then another thought struck me. Was the secret somehow connected to the fire? Just as I was grappling with these questions, Jake showed up. His clothes smelled of smoke, and his face was pale. "I heard what happened," he said, avoiding my gaze. I held up the letter. "Did you know about this?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Jake hesitated, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. I might have heard something about it," he admitted, "but I didn't think it was real. Tom never told me where it was." My mind was racing. If Jake knew about the money, who else did? And why had he shown up now, after all this time? His evasive answers only deepened my suspicions. And then he dropped another bombshell. "You're not the only one who's been looking for that money," Jake said quietly. "Tom's old business partner, Greg, has been asking questions. He thinks it's still in the house." I froze. Greg. I hadn't seen him in years, but I remembered the arguments he and Tom used to have, loud, heated fights over debts and broken promises. If Greg believed there was money hidden in the house, could he have been desperate enough to do something drastic? The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but nothing made sense yet. All I knew was that this fire wasn't just an accident. And if I wanted answers, I'd have to face the secrets that were finally coming to light. The letter haunted me. Tom's cryptic words, the whispers of hidden money, and Jake's ominous warning about Greg, it was all too much. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why would Tom hide something so important from me? And if Greg thought the money was still in the house, what would he do now that the house was gone? Later that day, I got a call from the insurance company. A stern voice on the other end of the line asked me to come in for a meeting. "We have some questions about the fire," the man said. His tone was polite but cold, and I could feel the weight of suspicion in every word. When I arrived, the questions came fast and sharp. Was there anything unusual in the days leading up to the fire? Do you know how it started? Do you have any reason to believe someone might have set it intentionally? I answered as honestly as I could, but the looks they gave me made my stomach churn. They weren't just investigating the fire, they were investigating me. My mind raced with all the rumors I'd heard. Did someone tell them I'd done this on purpose? Was it Greg? Or could Jake have said something to shift the blame? As if the stress of the interrogation wasn't enough, I noticed a familiar face in the corner of the office. Greg. He was leaning casually against the wall, talking to someone I didn't recognize. His eyes met mine for a split second, and the smug smile he gave me sent a chill down my spine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the small motel room where Mia, Daniel, and I had been staying, staring at the letter over and over again. My kids were finally asleep, their tiny bodies curled up on the creaky bed. I wanted to cry, scream, do something, but instead, I just felt numb. Jake called me around midnight. "Elena, you need to hear this," he said, his voice urgent. "What now, Jake?" I asked, trying to keep my voice low. "I talked to someone who knows Greg," he said. "Apparently, he's been trying to track down that money for years. He's convinced Tom hid it somewhere before he died. And get this, he thinks you know where it is." I clenched my fists. That's ridiculous. I didn't even know it existed until now. Jake hesitated before saying, "Elena, Greg's not the kind of guy who lets things go. If he thinks you're in his way, he won't stop until he gets what he wants." For a moment, I felt paralyzed by fear. Greg had always been intimidating, but the thought of him coming after me and my kids was terrifying. I thought the fire was the worst thing that could happen, but now it felt like the fire was just the beginning. And then Jake said something that sent a fresh wave of panic through me. "Elena, I think Greg started the fire." The room felt like it was spinning. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. "I can't prove it," Jake admitted, "but think about it. He's been obsessed with finding that money. Maybe he thought burning the house down would force you to talk, or at least get him closer to whatever Tom left behind." My heart pounded in my chest. If Jake was right, Greg wasn't just a threat, he was dangerous, and the fire wasn't an accident. It was a message. I realized then that I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had to find out the truth about the money, about Greg, and about Tom's secrets. Because if I didn't, I wasn't just risking my own life, I was putting Mia and Daniel in danger too. But to get answers, I would have to confront Greg, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what I'd find. The next day, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. If Greg thought I knew where the money was, I had to face him before things spiraled even further. I asked Jake to meet me at a diner just outside town. It was a neutral place, public enough to feel safe, but quiet enough to have a serious conversation. Jake was already waiting when I arrived, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as soon as I sat down. "No," I admitted, "but I don't have a choice. If Greg is behind the fire, I need to know why. And if he thinks there's money, maybe he knows more about Tom's secrets than I do." Jake sighed. "Just be careful, Elena. Greg's not the kind of guy you can trust." I called Greg right there in the diner, my hands trembling as I held the phone. He answered on the second ring, his voice smooth and confident. "Elena," he said, as if we were old friends, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I think we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "about the fire and about Tom." There was a pause, and then Greg chuckled. "Well, aren't you full of surprises? All right, let's talk. Meet me at the old warehouse on Maple Street. Tonight." The warehouse. My heart sank. It was the kind of place you only saw in bad crime movies, dark, abandoned, and full of shadows. But I knew I had to go. That evening, I told Jake to stay with Mia and Daniel. "Don't let them out of your sight," I said. "I don't trust Greg, and I don't want them anywhere near this." Jake protested, but I wouldn't budge. "Just promise me you'll keep them safe," I said, and after a moment, he nodded. When I arrived at the warehouse, the air was cold and the silence was deafening. Greg was waiting inside, leaning casually against a metal beam. The dim light cast long shadows across his face, making him look even more menacing than I remembered. "You're braver than I thought," he said with a smirk. "Or maybe just desperate." "I want answers," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Did you start the fire?" Greg's smirk widened. "What makes you think I'd do something like that? Don't play games with me," I snapped. "I know you've been looking for Tom's money. I found the letter. And I know you think I know where it is." For a moment, Greg's expression darkened, and I saw the cracks in his facade. "Tom owed me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "That money should have been mine. Do you have any idea how much he screwed me over?" I took a step back, my pulse racing. "So you did it," I said. "You burned down my house to get to the money." Greg laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Believe what you want, Elena, but here's the thing, you're not as innocent as you think you are." My breath caught. "What are you talking about?" Greg pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and tossed it at me. I unfolded it with shaking hands and felt my stomach drop. It was another letter from Tom, but this one was addressed to Greg. In it, Tom admitted he'd hidden the money because he didn't trust Greg or me. "You see," Greg said, his voice dripping with satisfaction, "Tom wasn't the saint you thought he was. He lied to both of us. And now we're both chasing a ghost." I felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over me. Tom had been my rock, my partner, but this was a side of him I didn't recognize. Greg took a step closer, his voice soft but menacing. "So here's the deal, Elena. If you find that money, you give it to me, all of it, or things might get difficult for you." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stand tall. "If you come near me or my family again, I'll make sure you regret it," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. Greg smirked. "We'll see about that." As I walked out of the warehouse, my mind was racing. Tom's secrets had put us all in danger, and Greg wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. But I wasn't going to let him win. I knew now that the money wasn't just a lifeline, it was a curse. And if I wanted to protect my family, I'd have to find it before Greg did. But first, I had to figure out if I was willing to pay the price for the truth. After the confrontation with Greg, I drove straight back to the motel. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my mind replaying every word Greg had said. The second letter from Tom weighed heavily on my mind. He had lied to both of us, and now his secrets were threatening to destroy everything I had left. When I walked into the motel room, Jake stood up immediately. "What happened?" he asked, his voice full of concern. I sank into the chair by the small table, exhausted. "Greg didn't deny it," I said. "He's been chasing the money for years, and he thinks I'm the key to finding it, but there's more." I pulled the second letter from my pocket and handed it to Jake. He read it quickly, his face growing darker with each line. "Tom really wrote this?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. I nodded. "He lied to me, Jake. He hid the money, not just from Greg, but from me too. And now, because of his secrets, my family is in danger." Jake sat down, running a hand through his hair. "So, what do we do now?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I can't let Greg win. If he finds that money, there's no telling what he'll do. I have to find it first." For the next few days, I threw myself into solving the mystery. I went through every memory, every clue Tom might have left behind. The letter hinted at a safe place, but where could that be? The house was gone, reduced to ashes. The answers had to be somewhere else. Then, one night, as I was flipping through an old photo album I'd managed to save, I noticed something I hadn't before. In one of the pictures, Tom was standing in front of a small cabin in the woods. It was a place he used to take the kids camping when they were little, but we hadn't been there in years. My heart raced. Could that be it? Could Tom have hidden the money there? The next morning, I packed up the kids and told Jake we were going on a little trip. I didn't tell him or the kids the real reason. I didn't want to get their hopes up. We drove for hours, the tension in my chest growing with every mile. When we finally arrived at the cabin, it was exactly as I remembered, small, rustic, and tucked away in the middle of nowhere. The kids ran off to explore while Jake and I started searching. At first, it felt hopeless. The cabin was mostly empty, and there weren't many places to hide anything. But then Jake called out from the corner of the room, "Elena, come here." I rushed over to find him kneeling by the fireplace. He had pulled out one of the loose bricks, revealing a small metal box hidden behind it. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a bundle of cash, along with another letter from Tom. I unfolded the letter and began to read. "Elena, if you're reading this, it means the worst has happened. I'm sorry for all the pain I've caused you. I thought I was protecting you by keeping the secret, but now I see how wrong I was. This money was meant to be a fresh start for us, a way to leave the past behind. Use it wisely, and please forgive me. Love, Tom." Tears streamed down my face as I read his words. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and relief. Tom had made so many mistakes, but in the end, he had tried to do the right thing. Jake put a hand on my shoulder. "What now?" he asked softly. I took a deep breath. "We use it to rebuild," I said. "For the kids. For our future. And we make sure Greg never gets his hands on it." We left the cabin that day with the money and a renewed sense of purpose. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let Tom's mistakes define us. It was time to start over, to build a life free from the shadows of the past. And no matter what Greg did, I was ready to fight for my family and our future. The drive home felt different. Lighter, even though the weight of everything that had happened still pressed against my chest. The kids were asleep in the back seat, their soft breaths filling the car with a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. As I glanced at the road ahead, I thought about everything we had been through: the fire, the lies, the chase for the money, and the toll it had taken on all of us. The hardest part wasn't finding the money or facing Greg. It was facing the truth. The truth about Tom, the truth about me, and the truth about what it meant to really start over. I turned to Jake, who was driving quietly beside me, his eyes on the road. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we'd never found that letter? If we hadn't figured out Tom's secret?" Jake glanced at me briefly, then back at the road. "I think about it all the time. But then again, I don't know if we would have been ready for the truth until now." I nodded slowly. "I guess the hardest part is knowing that even the people we trust the most can have their own secrets, their own reasons for doing things. But it doesn't change what we have now, and it doesn't change what we're going to do with it." As we drove into town, I realized something. The past couldn't be erased. No matter how much we wished we could rewrite it, the truth was always going to be there. But what mattered was how we moved forward. When we pulled into the driveway, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't the end I had imagined, but it was enough. It was more than I had hoped for. I turned off the engine and turned to Jake. "You know," I said with a small smile, "I think we've earned ourselves a little peace for once." Jake grinned back at me. "You've earned a lot more than that, Elena. You've earned a future." As I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door, I knew that the hardest chapter of my life was over. The fire had burned away so much of what we thought we knew, but in the end, it had also cleared the way for something new. The future was uncertain, but it was ours to shape. And no matter what came next, I knew we would face it together, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever life threw our way. In the end, I learned that sometimes the fire that threatens to destroy us is the same one that forces us to rise from the ashes and rebuild, stronger than before. And that, perhaps, is the greatest gift of all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more emotional journeys and unforgettable twists. See you in the next one.